What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is my second video. I'm very excited to make it. Today we're going to be talking about potential heroes and villains that they can add from the Marvel Universe into Marvel Rivals. Now, without further ado, let's get straight into it. And again, thank you guys for stopping by and checking it out. We're going to be talking about a few things today. We're going to be covering the 3 different roles in which these characters can fall under. However, please keep in mind that this video does not mean that these characters are coming. This is just my guess on which ones could be coming and which ones have potential to do really well in this game. So please bear that in mind as you watch this video, and please enjoy. Starting us off in the Vanguard or tank section is Atom Smasher. His first ability would be that he can grow in size and increase damage done by himself. However, he receives a decrease in movement speed temporarily. His second ability would be that he can absorb 50% of all damage, allowing him to gain a rapidly decaying shield from this damage absorbed. His ultimate would be that he can increase the distance between his atoms, allowing him to go through walls in a phase state, pushing out radiation and damaging nearby enemies. However, he cannot use any other attacks apart from this radiation during this phase until it ends, and he can still take damage. Next up on the list is Colossus. Colossus will have a few abilities. The first one, he turns his skin into pure armor and steel, neglecting all damage for a short while. His second ability, it will be that he has enhanced auto attacks. His auto attacks will be like Hulk, where he uses his fist as a melee. However, with the second ability, it will add knockbacks to the auto attacks for a short duration. His ultimate will turn him into pure steel again, but this time deflects all damage directed at him in a scattered direction. Kind of like Star-Lord's spin ability, but he only does damage if he's being shot at. The third tank on our list is Iron Cross. His auto attacks will just be his standard cannons that shoot sound waves. His second ability will be that he can fly around, kind of like Star-Lord, but maybe not to that extent, more temporarily. And his third ability will be that he can release an electrical magnetic pulse around him that does damage or it slows. I haven't decided 100%, so either one kind of works. His fourth ability will be an ink release, which allows him to put up an ink shield like a squid and provide cover for his team. This can be kind of thought of as the Punisher smoke grenade, however, it'll be a little bit longer lasting. His ultimate could be sleeping gas. This releases a gas around him in quick burst that puts all enemies around him to sleep for a short duration. Next up, we have Rogue. Her first auto attacks will just be her Bone Claws, which are a melee auto attack. Her second ability would be that she enters a state of charging and super strength, as she slashes while she charges for a short distance. However, during this ability, she would be unable to use anything else and cannot change directions, but she deals extra damage while she is charging. Her third ability would enable her to steal one other person's ability, such as a Loki's ult, and give her a shield when she uses that. Her ultimate would be that she can absorb and steal shielding from nearby enemies within a small radius that lasts for a little bit and then depletes over time. And lastly, in the tank category, we have the Juggernaut. His melee attacks would be with his head, a headbutt, or it could be 2 punches, and then the third auto attack would be a headbutt. Kind of like how Moon Knight's melee is 2 standard hits, and then the third one knocks back. His first ability would allow him to regenerate health for a short period of time. However, this can be stopped if he takes any damage, but the cooldown would be reduced if this does happen. His second ability would be that a force field would apply around him that stops damage while active, but it can be broken and applies a bleeding effect to Juggernaut of 65% of all the damage dealt during that force field time. His ultimate would be that he can rapidly dash in a direction for a short time, and if an enemy is hit, the enemy becomes pinned, and if the dash goes into an unbreakable wall with the enemy is now stunned. Starting us off in the DPS category, we have Deadpool. His auto attacks would be slashing with his sword, and every third auto attack would be a double slash, dealing a little bit of extra damage. His first ability would give him the power to regenerate a small amount of health, kind of like Iron Fist, but it doesn't carry over to extra shielding. His second ability would allow him to switch to double pistols with 6 shots each in each of those guns. During this ability, he cannot use his sword, but his jumping height would be increased. The ability would end when all 6 shots in both pistols are depleted for a total of 12 shots. His ultimate would allow him to leap forward in a spiral, kind of like Cloak and Dagger, but he spews out blades and bullets around him, dealing massive damage to those who are unfortunate enough to be next to him. He gets 1 leap forward and cannot change directions during the leap. Next up, we have War Machine. So his auto attacks, I feel like, would be pretty similar to what we already have with Iron Man, given that it's his best friend and they both rock like a suit of armor. But some differences would be that he has the ex-wife missile that shoots and does explosive damage to enemies. I also think a pretty funny emote would be if it just plops into the ground like it does in the movies. That would be pretty funny. Obviously he has flights, and his ultimate, I'm thinking the Gatling gun would shoot timer delayed explosive rounds in a line across the ground, doing 2 waves of damage. So the initial damage of the bullets impacting the ground and anybody that it hits, and also the explosive damage afterwards. I think that would be really, really cool to see. Next up, we have Shang-Chi. This one is interesting. The design that I have for him is more or less on the 4 or 5 star of difficulty. So let's kind of break it down. His auto attacks obviously starts with 5 rings on each hand. It would enable him to throw out a single ring that can attach to an enemy and mark them. Activating the ability would recall the rings, doing damage, which is the same amount of damage as a normal auto attack when it hits them. Again, this is kind of like the Psylocke Shuriken ability. His second ability would be that he can bounce into the air using his rings. His third ability would form a defensive circle around him in an X shape, which is pictured here, creating a protective shield that blocks damage for a short duration, but it does not give him any heal or give shield. His ultimate would cause the rings around him to explode in a circle on a 2D plane, dealing massive damage and also marking enemies. The rings would then retract after clicking the ult button again, and all marked enemies would take massive damage again. However, this must be cast in the air prior to hitting the ground or landing, and the second half of the ult can be cast without any airtime, so the second half can be cast when he's already on the ground. Iceman is next on the list. He's a little bit lesser known than some of our counterparts here on this list, but he's still really cool nonetheless. His auto attacks would be shooting out bolts of ice that deal damage with the ability to crit on headshots. His first ability would be that he can throw out a grenade that can temporarily freeze enemies in a blast radius for a short amount of time. Second ability would be the ability to throw out patches of ice that can enable him to glide effortlessly along the ground and walls. And his third ability would be able to make a platform of ice that he can lift into the air with people on it. This could be allies or enemies, it doesn't really matter. This platform can also be broken by damage. This is really unique because I feel like it casts a more vertical but not flying kind of aspect to the game. His ultimate would cast a blizzard upon the battlefield in a circle, similar to Invisible Woman's ult, and it does slowing and damage over time. It would also restrict vision as time goes on and the blizzard becomes more intense, but vision would be restricted for both teams. Next up is Ant-Man. His auto attacks would just be the standard melee punching and kicking, kind of similar to Iron Fist. I wasn't able to come up with anything better, but if you guys are able to, please let me know in the comments down below. His first ability would enable him to become massive, kind of similar to Hulk, but a much bigger player model, and he would then do 3 stomps on the ground that do knockback and damage. However, movement becomes very, very, very sluggish, and this is for balancing reasons. He would also gain a rapidly decaying shield. His second ability would allow him to become microscopic, getting picked up by an ant and flying for a short duration. He would be able to control which direction he goes, up, down, left, right, forward, back, all axes, and he would also be able to take damage during this state. His ultimate would be an ant attack, in which he summons an army of ants that picks up the 2 closest enemies, suspending them in the sky for a small duration while inflicting damage through ant bites over time. This would be kind of similar to the idea of bleeding or ticking damage over time. This next one is interesting. The next, we have Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel would use energy, or more specifically solar energy, and Captain Marvel would use this energy for everything, including movement. It's kind of similar to Thor's hammer system, where he needs 3 hammers to enter the rage state, and he just goes berserk. Captain Marvel's auto attacks would just be laser beams coming out of the eyes, which does damage. This is pretty similar to Iron Man's chest beam. However, the damage would ramp up the longer you stay on target, with the damage resetting after you miss a tick on the target. The second ability would be flight, which is pretty self-explanatory and uses energy to stay in the air. The third ability would actually enable Captain Marvel to absorb solar energy from enemies around Captain Marvel, recharging the energy bar. The fourth ability would turn the energy into a shield. It depletes the energy very fast while it's in use, but Captain Marvel will take no damage from anything. Captain Marvel's ultimate will enable Captain Marvel to turn into a projectile, flying through enemies, gaining speed with each enemy hit, marking them. Hitting walls will effectively end this ultimate, and after the ultimate is concluded, the solar marks in which the enemies were marked will explode, dealing massive damage. Captain Marvel can't take damage in this ult and will also gain a small shield. And now we have Gambit. His auto attacks would just be throwing cards, but they have different effects on enemies if they hit. There are 3 different types of cards: a stun, a blind, and an explosive one. The cards are cycled in that order over and over, but the cycle resets with each reload. Cards will be limited to 6 total before needing to reload. Giving credit where credit is due, I took inspiration for this part from League of Legends Twisted Fate, so good job Riot Games, it's a really cool character. His second ability allows him to become a mirage, becoming untargetable to any projectile damage. He can still take damage from sources such as Cloak and Dagger ult, but not Cloak and Dagger auto attacks, and this ability would last for a very short duration. His third ability would allow him to heal a small amount of health. His ultimate would hypnotize enemies in front of him within a short range, making them turn and attack allies for a short duration. The enemies would lose control of their characters during this, but would regain it after. And now we have Carnage. This one is also pretty interesting. His auto attacks are, well, they can change. He can swing a symbiote sword, slashing enemies in front of him, but he can also warp his arms into a sword, a spear, darts, throwing knives, and even an axe. The swords would obviously slash, spears would poke, darts would be thrown along with the throwing knives, and the axe would be hacked. He can enhance the sword for a few seconds with his first ability, adding a bleeding effect and cutting healing by 10% while bleeding effect is active. This can also be used with other weapons as well. Carnage also has the ability to swing like Spider-Man and Venom, and he can also climb up walls. However, this is where it gets a little bit different. Carnage also has an ability which allows him to heal with damage dealt. So the more damage he does, the more he heals. His ultimate allows him to latch onto an ally, giving them a large shield and changing their form into a symbiote. The allied would gain extra shield, extra damage, and extra mobility, but would suffer from a vision loss. It's kind of like Cloak and Dagger blind, but it wouldn't be as intense. It's a little bit more mild. I'm thinking a couple meters or something like that where they can still see. Carnage and the host would share the damage taken 50-50, and both of them would get a shield. The host would also gain the ability to climb walls. Carnage can still do damage in this form, and he would be pushing out spikes periodically every several seconds, dealing some moderate damage. The ult will last for around 8 seconds, and Carnage can cancel it anytime. Starting us off in the support category is Silver Surfer. I thought it'd be pretty cool to have a support that more revolves around giving shield and an energy system than actively giving out health. Silver Surfer's auto attacks would be throwing darts made of silver, and the dart does damage to enemies with the ability to critically headshot, but if it hits an ally, it would give the ally a small shield that can stack. This shield would deplete over time when Silver Surfer stops auto attacking them or misses them with the darts. His second ability is a glide in the air using his silver surfboard, kind of similar to Moon Knight. He can also manipulate energy through damage taken by allies that are within a small radius of himself, and 1 damage taken would be equivalent to about 0.5 energy gained. Passive regeneration on himself is also something that he would have. This would be health, so he would always be passively regenerating health unless he takes damage, and that would pause it. His ultimate would be like Adam Warlock's soul bonding, and it can use the energy stored to give everyone a shield within a small radius around him. If he had 500 energy stacked, then everybody around him would get a 500 shield, but if he only has 1 energy stacked, then everybody would be getting a shield with only 1 extra health. Next up, we have Dr. Octopus. His auto attacks would just be him throwing out his tentacles, kind of like Mr. Fantastic, but he can also climb walls with these, like Spider-Man. His first ability would allow him to grab an enemy, and it would also enable him to throw the grabbed enemy a short distance either to the left or to the right. He can also grab an ally and pull them backwards, granting them a very large shield that starts to decay after a few seconds. His third ability would allow him to electrify his tentacles, This would ultimately reduce his attack speed, but enemies hit with his tentacles with his auto attack are stunned for a short duration. His ultimate would command his nanomachines to latch onto allies within a radius, granting them extra mobility, damage, as well as faster reloads and allowing them to increase jumping height. They would also all gain a small shield. Next up, we have Falcon. He's a bit different than our usual supports. His auto attacks would allow him to shoot enemies with his SMG pistols, and these can critically headshot. He can also command his drone to fly, and going into this drone mode would result in Falcon being unable to move, but still being able to take damage. His drone can paint enemies with a tracking dart, allowing them to be visible through the walls for a short duration of time, and for the whole team to see. The team would be able to see the health stats as well as where they are. The drone can also be shot down. Falcon can also fly like Iron Man and also glide like Moon Knight. He also has the ability to shoot a rocket while in flight that does explosive damage towards enemies, putting up a smoke screen, kind of like Punisher's smoke grenade. His ultimate gives himself unlimited flight, giving movement speed to himself and his team. Everyone on the enemy team becomes marked invisible through walls if they are in his line of sight at the time of activating the ult. All health becomes visible as well. Falcon also gains the ability to deploy a smoke screen from underneath him while he's in flight, and this stays for quite a while. During his ultimate, Falcon can also allow his team to gain a shield equivalent to 50% of their missing HP, and this shield will not decay after the ultimate is done. We now have Green Goblin. Green Goblin's auto attack would just be him throwing a grenade that does poison taking damage if it hits enemies. It also does explosive damage as well, but the explosive damage won't be as much. He can also have the ability to throw a healing grenade that can heal a large chunk of health if it hits allies. This grenade would be on a relatively low cooldown to keep up with the other meta healings in the game. He also has the ability to throw a dagger that can bounce like Moon Knight's auto attacks, and enemies hit will receive poison damage over time. His ultimate allows him to hop onto his hoverboard, dropping healing and poison grenades underneath him wherever he flies. He also gains movement speed and a small shield during this. And lastly, but definitely not least, is Nightshade. Nightshade's auto attacks would just be her throwing daggers, and these can also critically headshot. She can also teleport a short distance, and wherever she lands, she would grant healing a large chunk of health. She can also instill fear into one single enemy, stopping them from using any abilities, and this includes ultimates for a short duration. Her ultimate injects allies within a radius with a chemical serum that grants them extra health and shield. She would also grant healing over time, but this would only apply if they stay within the radius of her ult. Once again, I want to thank everyone for watching this video. If there's anything you guys disagree with, want to change, or think could be improved, let me know in the comments down below. If this type of content is something you all enjoy watching, please consider hitting that subscribe and like button, as well as the bell notification so that every time I put out a video, you guys will be notified. I want to make a quick note that the reason I did not include any of the leaked or confirmed characters such as Ultron or Human Torch is because I wanted this video to be more about the hypothetical and allow people to realize that there is essentially no limit to what they can accomplish here. Once again, thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. My name is Panda and I will see you all next time. Peace.